Thank you for joining us on day 2 of our podcast, Decoding the Black Box, Cybersex Trafficking, What Doctors Miss, and What Cybersex Trafficking Survivors Need to Bring Up to Their Physicians. A little housekeeping. We mentioned a few things yesterday that may have been a little jarring. Yeah, what part, right? Well, let's just ask about the questions doctors should be asking. Are you in your trade? Do you have multiple partners? And some might think that is rather intrusive. But for a survivor, taking the time to ask that question may be that first opportunity. Someone is taking a time to care. So while it may be intrusive and perhaps a little bit offensive to some, for the majority who are survivors, it's thank you for asking the question. And the last time we had ran a podcast during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we had a feedback in regards to discounting what our cybersex trafficking survivors went through. That it was what they were going through was not actually sexual violence, but rather a medical condition where a survivor is going through or a rather orgasmic reaction all the time. And there is a medical conditions like that. But what was important to bring up in yesterday's day 1 podcast, Decoding the Black Box, Cybersex Trafficking, is that the STI. There's no sexually transmitted infection for a medical condition which causes orgasmic feelings in different settings all the time. So that was very important that people get the distinction between one versus the other. This is sexual violence. This is trafficking. And the pimps and traffickers are making their presence known remotely on the survivor's anatomy. So on our day 2, we're going to be discussing in further detail inflammation and weight and menstrual cycles, because that presents itself to the physician's office, gynecologist's office, a little touches with nurses as well, and what they can look for and when survivors need to go in to get help. Now, if you're paying attention to yesterday's day 1, you notice that in certain circumstances when the traffickers or pimp behind the black box wanted to restrict movement of their cybersex trafficking survivor, they would cause pain sensations to their feet, to their legs, to prohibit their mobility, particularly if they were going out of their normal range, to have the full effect of their tech on the survivors. But what people don't realize and what doctors don't realize is that idiomatic reaction that the body is having to this in real time. So prolonged pain sensation to an area, to a body, eventually winds up presented itself in an injury and damage to cellular structures. And that causes inflammation within the body. So what that winds up happening over a period of time is that the whole entire body becomes inflamed, under inflammation. So someone who's normally a size 2-4 would be a size 8 just through inflammation. Someone who is a size 12 would be a size 18 just through inflammation. So this has a profound effect on weight and people's perception of someone just by weight. Now, if you were paying attention to Oprah's Winfrey shame when it comes to weight, and you related to that, then you can relate to what some of our cybersex trafficking survivors goes through just by the idiomatic symptoms of inflammation. And unfortunately, most of the weight loss products, if you don't take care of the source of the problem, they're not going to be effective on individuals who are targeted through this type of technology. So now you have body shaming from the outside public. Now you have internal feelings of abandonment because you're being sexually violated and no one knows what you're going through. You also have feelings of alienation because no one else is going through what you're going through. And you have feelings of worthlessness because no one cares, because no one knows what you're going through. You're in your own struggle. And at the same time, you're moving around through different individuals, whether public, or in your car, or moving around individuals just making comments out of their mouths, looking at cybersex trafficking survivors for different reasons. And sometimes it could be the result of what their traffickers are doing to them online through their images. So you have that going on as well. So let's break that down a little bit because it's a lot. So what exactly is going on within the body? Because with everything's going on with the cybersex trafficking survivors, weight may be the tipping point, but the reason why they would present themselves to the physician's office is because they've been classified as obese, or they've been classified as you're pre-diabetic, or they've been classified as hypertensive. So, or these conditions got brought about because they passed out and then they went to the ambulance service, and then the ambulance service, when they went to the emergency room, classified them at these either three things: pre-diabetic, hypertensive, or obese. And they're going to be instructed to lose weight, reduce their sodium, as our cybersex trafficking survivors did. But it's not going to solve the problem because we're not solving the source of the problem. And there are various sources of the problem. So, in one of our cybersex trafficking survivor, one of those behind the black box, or trafficker of the black box, would intentionally wake up the survivors around 3 o'clock in the morning just to do whatever, because it wasn't just to have sex with the survivor. He could have done that any time. It's to just mess with the survivor, mess with the ability to knee jerk the survivor. Just trying to manipulate the vagus nerve, really, which is knee jerking, having your knee pop, causing a Charlie horse, seeing what else they can do with the black box remotely. And so that interrupts sleep patterns. Now, on average, we need 8 hours of sleep, right? Scientists have said you need 8 hours of sleep. Doctors have said you need 8 hours of sleep because that's the time where your body does all your repairs. And notice from day one, this caused a lot of damages to the body. So coupled with that, plus lack of sleep, you have cellular damage to the body that results in bruising, but also bruising internally. Now, before we get into hypertensive, pre-diabetic, or obese, what's happening in the body with these damaged cells is that an area that's damaged doesn't stay in that one area. They wind up influencing other healthy cells in the body as well. You're going to hear a term that's been recent in the last 2 years, and that's called zombie cells. And what the zombie cells are just damaged cells that stick around that makes other cells also pick up that same characteristic, which makes the whole entire human body sick as a whole. So that sick as a whole, that's that hypertensive. Sick as a whole is that pre-diabetic. Sick as a whole is that clinically obese. So scientists are just now looking at sentient cells, and how to manage it, because some of these zombie cells can sometimes return back into healthy cells, sometimes not. But what is really disturbing when you look at this is that who got most infected by COVID and long COVID? Those who were pre-diabetic, those who were clinically obese, and those who were hypertensive. Who got faced more mortality? Who faced more mortality when it came to COVID? Those who were pre-diabetic, diabetic, clinically more obese, and hypertensive. So we're going to add one more element to that, and how we manage our stress, because this is extremely stressful, and our survivors have different stress mechanisms. So again, those who didn't manage their stress well and depended on vaping or cigarettes or other alternatives to calm their nerves and anxiety in dealing with their Johns and traffickers, they faced the worst. When COVID came around, they faced the worst. So we have got to get the medical community on board in helping our cybersex trafficking survivors, so that they survive. They survive this. So there's another idiomatic symptom that presented to the cybersex trafficking survivors, brought on by the pimp and traffickers behind the black box during that 3 a.m. hour, where they were knee-jerking and causing Charlie horses. They would also influence hormone levels, particularly ghrelin. And ghrelin is one of those hormones that stimulate hunger, the need to eat. So during those hours, they was just, because this is stimulating the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve also includes hormones, they would stimulate ghrelin. And that would cause one of our cybersex trafficking survivors to get up and eat at 3 a.m. in the morning, because she felt ravenously hungry. So we saw almost immediately this 135-pound woman grossly put on 60, 70 pounds. Just through the overstimulation of that ghrelin hormone. And what is remarkable is that when you feel that need to eat, there's nothing that can turn that off, because it's like it's just like a survival mechanism, forcing you to go ahead and satiate that need. It's not a want, it's not a desire, it's you have to. And I don't know what was in the heads of the pimp or trafficker. It's just because, I guess, for their monetary means, remote sex is remote sex. They already have an image up of what this woman looked like before she added 60 to 70 pounds, so they can alter and edit photos of what the survivors look like, rather than their after. So it doesn't matter, because the Johns that signing up for their photos, and so they just sign on, not knowing what they really look like now, because of all the damage done to their molecular body. And so diet and exercise does not work because of the idiomatic symptoms that present themselves from the black box: disturbing circadian sleep, stimulating gremlin. So the modern weight loss products that's on the market may or may not be effective depending on the genes, and that's another thing. The genes of our cybersex trafficking survivors. DNA also gets damaged over time. So it takes 30 days. 30 days when the body creates new cells, new replicating cells. And so if the replicating cells that is meant to create new cells has a kink, then what it's doing is producing damaged cells with that replicated damage program within that cellular structure. So we're looking at a mortality, a dangerous mortality for our cybersex trafficking survivors. And I think it's more dangerous than that of those survivors who is in typical human trafficking, or they're at par with one another, because you're facing a pimp or a trafficker who wants to dox survivors. So I would say that they're really on par, because our cybersex trafficking survivors sometimes lose their will to live because of their circumstances. And so you can't treat depression if you're not dealing with those idiomatic factors as well. So it's not the weight, it's all the factors leading up to this. So there's another factor that would lead a cybersex trafficking survivor presenting themselves to the emergency room as a obese individual, or someone who's pre-diabetic or hypertensive. Now the survivor may know they've put on weight. The survivor may know that their body is running a lot slower, or it takes a long time to move around, but they may not know that they are hypertensive. Now, for one cybersex trafficking survivor, she went in for a routine exam, and they told the survivor that who was put on an EKG machine, that if they are not prescribed medication, they could die the next day. Because the survivor was reluctant to take medication, because naturally, never having to deal with anything related to hypertensiveness. And now being told that she could die if she don't take medication. So naturally, the survivor went on medication, but no one asked about her lifestyle. No one asked if she was eating healthy, she was exercising, and that this EKG reading was idiomatic of the cybersex trafficking. All they did was put her on medication to manage the symptoms of the cybersex trafficking. That didn't prevent other underlying conditions in the body. It didn't prevent more obesity. It didn't prevent more prediabetes. It just managed one of the idiomatic condition. And I think it's important to get. Cybersex trafficking survivors are walking around with many underlying conditions, and not just the one that people physically see, and not just one that they are diagnostically tested for. So, in moving forward with that, the cybersex trafficking survivor decided to try some various weight loss drugs, medication to manage weight, right? Because weight was responsible for causing cancer. Weight was responsible for causing hypertension, diabetes, later on, heart attacks, cardiac arrest. So what if weight could be managed, and could it be managed as a cybersex trafficking survivor? And what one of our cybersex trafficking survivor went through is that most of the weight loss products on the market did little or nothing at all. And one item was a off-label weight loss product that came from another country, and that regulated the hormones within the cybersex trafficking survivor. And that it was an injection that has caloric restrictions. But what was important is because it was a hormone combating the hormone ghrelin that shut down the noise of ghrelin, that had the survivor on a greater success on weight loss. And that was the only product that worked for our cybersex trafficking survivor. And it's a 6-week injection. Now, the reason why our cybersex trafficking survivor risked it, and I'll explain the risk, because it's an off-label weight loss injection that is hormone-based and is not designated for weight loss. And potentially, it has the risk of causing cancer. But our cybersex trafficking was already too obese, dealing with cancer, potentially dealing with cancer, and also potentially dealing with a heart attack. So a hormone-combating hormone worked on the idiomatic symptom of the cybersex trafficking John and traffickers. Did it work long term? Long term is relative, because our cybersex trafficking survivors wants the end of this. They want the end of trafficking in regards to their circumstances. But as far as the weight loss treatment and keeping the weight off, presents the same problem with atypical individuals whose systems have been already compromised. So the weight loss worked for maybe 2 to 3 years, but the weight always wants to rebound. It doesn't rebound to the extent to gaining all the weight back that our cybersex trafficking survivor initially lost, but it does rebound to at least 30 pounds. It wants to revert back to 30 pounds, half the weight loss. And every single time our cybersex trafficking survivor takes the same hormone treatment for 6 weeks and staves off the weight for at least 2 or 3 years, same thing happens. The body rebounds for another 30 pounds. So what I am explaining to you is the fact that the system, lack of sleep, circadias, regulating of the body functions, zombie cells, damaged cells, replicating cells that replicates damaged cell programming, all has a factor into our, particularly our cybersex trafficking survivor molecular system. So depending on someone's genetic makeup, obesity, clinical obesity, is one of the determinant factors of cybersex trafficking. Is that the case for all? Perhaps not, because everyone has their own genetic makeup. But if you're interfering with circadias, if you're causing damage to cells, then majority of the cybersex traffickers are going to show up at the doctor's office as pre-diabetic, hypertensive, or clinically obese. And they're going to be looking for weight loss solutions. Because weight is expensive. Weight loss treatment is expensive, but dealing with weight related issues is expensive. Here's the other condition that our cybersex trafficking survivors are going to present themselves when they go to the doctor's office, and that is heavy menstrual cycle. And this is when the doctor referred them to the gynecologist, the OBGYN doctor, right? Because they deal with obstetrics, right? Everything dealing with menses and reproductive, that's their area. And what tends to happen under normal circumstances, without the interference of cybersex trafficking, the idiomatics of the cybersex trafficker or pimp, is that everything has a normal running cycle, right? Once a month, medium to light flow, and gone within 8 days. That's typical. That is typical. Now, there are those who present themselves atypical. Atypical meaning it can last 14 days. That's half a month. For our cybersex trafficking survivors, it's more than atypical. And not only is it more than atypical, we're talking about heavy from day one. We're talking about taking more than 2 weeks on the heaviest side of menses, heavy blood flow. What that represents is the time that you're not being active in other areas of your life. What's this taking is quality time from something else. And what it's doing is soiling one's clothes, because, a typical pad is not enough. The typical pad on a market is not enough for an atypical menses cycle. So you're talking about seepage onto clothes that now needs to be washed, and hopefully to get the blood stains out. And most times they don't come out the way it should. Come out brownish despite using bleach. And some clothes can't be bleached. Excursions and activities. Sometimes our cybersex trafficking survivors do not know typically when a flow is going to be coming around a certain month at the start. So if they were studying at the library or going on an errand and that blood start flowing, it gushes through everything, so that people can actually see a blood stain on a target's pants or shorts, depending if there is light colored or pastel. Now, these are idiomatic symptoms, but they're not just idiomatic. Sometimes it is caused intentionally by the trafficker of the black box. It's surreal, but sometimes it's intentional. It's intentional because certain individuals have certain fetishes, you know. In doing research on this, you know, you get to learn about other people's fetishes. And so because of people's fetishes with menses, some cybersex trafficking survivors are going to suffer more than other typical pimps or traffickers behind the black box. So they're going to present themselves to the gynecologist's office through their physicians. And, you know, this is the time for the gynecologist to ask those deep, probing questions about what circumstances are like. When did the menses start to change? Under what circumstances? This is how you get to the root of the trafficking, and particularly the cybersex trafficking, so that they can run some more diagnostic tools to figure out, you know, where this thing is positioned in the body. So this is the type of questions that a gynecologist should ask. Besides, when did you start your menses? That's a typical question. When did your menses become atypical? That question doesn't present itself. It should be a question. And another question should be asked is your menses flow, you know, the way you want it? Do you want it to be managed? And that's the question that should be asked as well. So, to get to the root behind the idiomatic symptoms that the pimp and traffickers are sending our cybersex trafficking to the physician's office, gynecologist's office, nurses. Thorough questions need to ask, because our survivors are just desperate for acknowledgement, desperate to know that the medical community has their back and that they're willing to not only help them with their present conditions, but manage all of their conditions to the source, so that they don't die. Their molecular systems just don't give out because they're susceptible to disease. Their bodies becomes to disease. So that needs to be the focus of our medical community. On day 3, we're going to be delving into some more. And what can our technicians, wireless technicians, hotspots technicians, can do to help survivors manage in their own environments and when they leave to other structures like school, work, faith-based places, mass transit. You know, our pimps and traffickers want to control these spaces. How can we bring the power back into the survivor spaces, including in the medical offices? One cybersex trafficking survivor, when she would go to the medical offices for gynecological visits, her pimp and trafficker was there monitoring the whole entire conversation in real time. So another question that physicians need to ask is, are you here for yourself? And is this conversation being monitored? Because you don't know. With Google Glasses and other stuff going on, you just don't know. Ask the question. That's the question to let you know that there's a cybersex pimp and trafficker involved. They're listening because they want to know what's coming at them. They want to be adequately prepared to get out of Dodge if a physician knows. And put notes in the patient's chart. So ask the question. Are you here by yourself? Are you being monitored in any way? Are you carrying anything, listening, that may alert someone? And then let them answer. You don't have to divulge anything else, but let them know. It's important that the medical community know that we have cybersex trafficking survivors in their midst, patients of theirs that need help and assistance. So that wraps up day 2 of decoding the black box, cybersex trafficking. And hopefully we demystified some things around cybersex trafficking survivors. See you on day 3.